Well, hello once again. How are you today? Welcome to another crime dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So that is what I talk about here. If you like true crime and also want to feel better about your own makeup skills, you should absolutely, if you want, like, subscribe, and let's hang out together every Tuesday where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. So yeah, how's it going? How's the month treating you? You guys getting any warm weather yet? I know there's some places still having a lot of snow. We're finally getting some nice weather here. It's one of those like lazy days, it's very nice out with a nice breeze, blue sky, and so I'm like in my pajama shirt here, just kind of hanging out and talking with ya. So let me know, how's it going? Is it like springtime yet where you're at? So let's talk about today's case. And oh my god, this one is pretty rough, I'm not gonna lie. We have another victim who was only 9 years old. I know last week we talked about, little Elizabeth Alton who was only 9. Yeah, this week's case, the victim, also 9 years old, 9-year-old little boy, and we'll get all into him. He's just, every time I ran into a photo of him, I don't know. I just wanted to just like scoop him up and hug him. Like, just such a precious little boy. Today, we will be talking about the case of Colton Clark. This was a requested case, and it was requested by Holly Lupton. So thank you so much, Holly, for letting me know about this case. And yeah, man, like, just be forewarned, guys. Like, it's so sad. We'll be talking a lot about child abuse in this case. And man, it's just, it's heartbreaking and infuriating. And yeah, so I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about Colton. So Colton Colt Levi Clark was born on May 24th, 1996. Now, I'm unclear if he was born Levi Colton Clark, because as we'll get into in a moment, Colton and his older brother had their names changed, and I was just a little confused on what exactly their birth names were. So yeah, there was like one or two sources that said he was actually born Levi Colton Clark, and then his name was later changed to Colton Levi Clark. But considering his name when he was reported missing was Colton Clark, I'm just going to call him Colton for the purposes of this video. So Colton had an older half-sister named Raven Womack, and he also had an older brother named Austin. Now, like with Colton, Austin's name would later be changed to Homer. So I wasn't sure if his name was Austin Homer Clark and it was later changed to Homer Austin Clark. Not sure. And Homer would go on to change his name again, but for the purposes of this video, I will be referring to Colton's brother as Homer. So right off the bat, unfortunately, poor Colton and Homer had a pretty rough start, pretty rough upbringing in life. Now, since Raven was quite a bit older, I believe she's like approximately 15 years older than her younger half-siblings. I do not believe she was raised alongside her brothers. Plus, she's their half-sibling, so I believe they just have their mother in common. There's not really a lot known about Colt's and Homer's biological parents, so I don't really know a whole lot. But we do know that Colton and Homer were raised together, and as I just said, they had a pretty rough go of it from the beginning. Both of their parents battled drug addiction along with alcohol addiction, so it shouldn't come as a totally big surprise that the two boys were often neglected, often left alone a lot, and just often not properly cared for. Now, I'm not sure exactly when, but I do know at some point the neglect got to the point where the Oklahoma Department of Human Services, we're just going to call them DHS for the video, had to step in and remove Colton and Homer from their biological parents. And they would then be shuffled around to other biological family. And this included their father's sister and their father's mother, their grandmother, Jerry Clark. The boys attended school in the Choctaw area, and they did have some biological family that did kind of step in and help care for them. They would take them to school in the mornings and, pick them up and visit them on weekends. friends. So they did have some family, it seems. Now, it is said Colton just loved animals, specifically loved horses, loved going horseback riding, loved westerns. That was his favorite. And it is said that he wanted to be a cowboy someday. He was all about that cowboy aesthetic, you know, with like the horses and the cowboy hats and stuff. And it is said he just really loved the outdoors and wanted to live that cowboy life when he got older. I mean, isn't that adorable? I mean, like, look at him. Look at these pictures of this little boy. How is he not totally adorable? How does that not melt your heart? So the boys do have some biological family that, is currently stepping up and helping take care of them. So that's great, right? Then, in October of 2003, Colton and Homer were then placed in the custody of their aunt and uncle. Their uncle was their father's brother, and his name was James Rex Clark. And he was married to the boys' aunt, Rebecca Faith Clark. The couple would end up officially adopting the boys in November of 2004, and I believe it is when their aunt and uncle adopt the boys that their names were legally changed. Now, James, or Rex as he went by his middle name, like I said, was their father's brother, and unfortunately he was not very stable. He was a Vietnam vet, and he suffered from a lot of mental health issues, including major depressive disorder, PTSD, and hepatitis C. Not that hepatitis C is a mental illness, but they were saying that the disease had progressed to the point where, like, I guess it was like affecting his brain, his neurological functions. Now, don't know a whole lot about James. According to public records, it looks like he was married briefly in May of 1969 when he was 19 years old. He married 18-year-old Bonnie Marie Rowland, excuse me. But the marriage didn't last, and by October of 1972, Bonnie had filed for divorce. And also, according to public records, looks like James struggled with drinking and driving. He was arrested twice on DUI charges in July of 1987, only 2 days apart, and again in August of that same year. And then we know at some point, Rex married Rebecca. I'm not sure when they got married, and I'm not even quite sure how long they had been together when they adopted their nephews and took them in. I do know that both Rex and Rebecca were registered nurses, and they had been registered nurses for several years before they took in the boys. However, Rex had voluntarily given up his nursing license in 2002, and Rebecca's was taken from her that same year. And wait until I tell you the reason their nursing licenses were taken away. So, the Oklahoma Board of Nursing did an investigation, and they stated that they had received several complaints about Rex and Rebecca. So what were these complaints? The complaints were that Rex and Rebecca were removing tattoos from juveniles at a Wowoka group home. Neither of them was licensed to do this procedure. And on top of that, they did not even obtain parental or guardian consent before doing these procedures on these boys. Now, Rebecca worked at this Wowoka group home facility, but Rex did not. And because these two idiots didn't know what they were doing, weren't licensed, hadn't practiced the procedure, 3 boys ended up suffering third-degree burns and permanent scarring. After the parents of some of these boys complained, that's when the Board of Nursing had stepped in and done their investigation. And at a hearing that was held in order to discuss these allegations and stuff, Rex and Rebecca refused to show up. Rebecca claimed that Rex was sick and she had to stay home and take care of him. Okay, sure, Jan. In the end, like we stated earlier, Rebecca's nursing license was taken from her, and Rex volunteered his to be taken away. Yeah, lovely people that these two boys are stuck with, huh? So as soon as the boys moved on to their aunt and uncle's 5-acre farm just south of Seminole in Wowoka, they thought they had found their happy ending, like it was like fresh open air, there was animals, there was like all this like land to play on and stuff, they thought like, oh my god, finally we have a permanent home and it's like so beautiful and stuff, right? Homer said, quote, "In those few days, it was a lifestyle that I thought we would enjoy. Rex and Becky treated us well. They had a farm and ponds to fish in, tons of animals. When we were in the foster system, they were as nice as could be to us. However, that all changed once the couple had officially adopted the boys in 2004. Homer went on to describe the change in behavior. Quote, "It went from day and night. It was a totally different life. We kind of became their personal little slaves. I think it was their plan all along. I truly felt they hated us. Colton and Homer's other family were immediately cut off from them. They were no longer allowed to see the boys, no longer allowed to pick them up to and from school, no longer allowed to see them on the weekends. And as you can guess, the reason for this was so these two fuckwads could abuse these boys. Yep. Yeah, I don't understand it. I really don't understand how anyone can harm a child. Specifically, I'm sorry, I mean, look at little Colton. How could you raise a hand to that little boy? Like, he's a precious fucking little boy, and I do not understand how you could put your hand on any child, let alone, like, this precious guy right here. But that is exactly what Rex and Rebecca did. Rebecca would often slap the boys with an open hand or slap them with broomsticks, while Rex would use extension cords to beat the boys or his fists. He also took sick pleasure in electrocuting the boys' genitals with a red and white cattle prod. The couple would often accuse the boys of stealing and would often beat and torture them with bamboo stalks, coat hangers, wooden canes, and this was regardless if the boys had actually done anything. And frankly, like, who cares if they had actually done anything? Like, I don't care if your child steals from you. Like physical abuse and beating is never, ever warranted or justified, right? But yeah, so Rex and Rebecca would, like, get a stick up their ass and accuse the boys of, like, stealing from them or something. And yeah, then just, like, beat them. Homer said, quote, "They would hit us with any object they could reach and find." The couple even at one point made the boys drink their own urine as punishment. I know. Homer went on, quote, "I wore glasses when I was younger, and my face would be so swollen by being hit and slapped that I couldn't put my glasses on my face. The fear is tremendous. That's the worst part. You wake up every day and you just have that pit in your stomach of, you're just so scared. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what to expect. It's just, you wake up and it's like living in hell." Those poor babies. I just can't imagine, dude. Like, and like these, like, it's cases like these that make me, like, if I ever had that motherly instinct to have children, I think this is why I would want to adopt and or foster, is for children like these, if we remember the Angela McNulty case with Jeanette, she was the same way, right? Like, put into foster care and was taken care of, and because the system failed her, she died, and we'll get into it in this case. There's a lot to get into. But yeah, it's so sad. I don't understand how you can harm a child, man. I really, really don't. I don't understand it. The boys were also verbally abused, of course. Homer said, quote, "The verbal abuse you can't even discuss. We were called every name in the book." He said Rex would often accuse him and Colton of being, like, sexual deviants and, like, perverts, and force them to write, like, bizarre sexual fantasies in, like, a journal. Yeah, isn't that weird? And you know what I thought of when I read that? I was like, oh my god, projection much? Like, maybe there were some thoughts that Rex had that he didn't like. I don't know, like that. I was just like, Jesus, dude, like, projection much? And it's just so weird, right? Like, what a weird thing to accuse an 11 and a 9-year-old. Oh, you're sexual deviants. And then, like, making them write, like, bizarre sexual fantasies? Like, brah. What the fuck? Now, signs of the abuse eventually became very apparent. Colton's 2005 school photos showed, like, very obvious and apparent bruising on his arms and face. Homer said, quote, "In the picture, he has a huge bruise on his arm, a bruise on his eye, and a bruise on his lip, and no one ever reported it." But someone may have reported it, or at least maybe questioned Rex and Rebecca, because it's around this time, towards the end of the 2005 school year, that the boys were taken out of public school and enrolled into homeschool. In June of 2005, so, around the time all this is going on, DHS received allegations that, quote, "the children were suffering from issues because of their past abuse." So DHS gets this allegation / complaint in June of 2005. And 2 months later, DHS finally dispatched a worker to go to the Clark farm and kind of like check it out. The DHS worker ended up interviewing Rebecca, who told the worker, quote, Colt was involved in self-mutilation and other inappropriate behaviors, such as killing the family's pet bird, starting fires in occupied beds, and prowling around at night with a knife while other family members slept. It was reported to the OKDHS, the Oklahoma DHS, that the adoptive dad handcuffed him, Colton, to the bed, and as a result, everyone got a good night's sleep. Yeah, knowing what we know, like how these boys are treated, doesn't that just really, really get under your skin? Like, that really grinded my gears when I read that. It's just like, are you kidding me? Gotta explain away those bruises and shit somehow, right? Rebecca also told the DHS worker that the children had had 5 different counselors in less than a year, and the worker just recommended that the family, quote, continue to access all mental health services. And I am unclear if this is related to what we just discussed with DHS, but an article I came across said that the same month of June 2005, Colton and Homer had accused 7 different family members of sexual molestation and abuse. They had supposedly been abused before coming into Rex and Rebecca's custody. And I guess there was an interview held with the 7 family members at the Midwest City Police Department. And the family members accused were never charged. However, one of them did confide in police that they believed Rex was abusing the boys. The article did not specify what kind of abuse, like physical, like sexual or whatnot, but just that one of these family members that the boys had accused of abuse told the police that they believed Rex was abusing the boys. A detective then interviewed Rex, and she told him, like, hey, we're not accusing you of any wrongdoing. We just need to investigate. Now, Rex told her that, he loved the boys, but they were severely damaged from their past abuse. He went on to say how they had been, like, traumatized and abused by their biological parents, who he kept referring to as, like, drug addicts and alcoholics. He said that the boys were always getting into trouble. Quote, if you're concerned, take them out of his home, because they're killing my ass. And, the detective told him, whoa, what? Like, no one's saying that. Like, we just need to investigate this, she said, like, we don't want to take them out of their custody, like, they've already bounced around a lot and, quote, bounced around and treated like crap all their lives. And they didn't want to add to that. Rex said that she could check him and Rebecca out, and no one in Seminole would have anything bad to say about them. He said he was a 100% disabled veteran, he had a tough life growing up, and he was estranged from all of his brothers and sisters. He told her that he had never hurt anybody in his life except for some Vietnamese, during the war, in which he, quote, killed a bunch. I killed men, women, and children. And when it came to his nephews, he said he would, quote, bust their ass, but never beat them. Then, less than a year later, on March 24th, 2006, DHS received yet another allegation/complaint that Colton and Homer were, quote, in threat of harm by their adoptive parents. This complaint was only assigned a, quote, priority 2 investigation, and a DHS worker wasn't dispatched to the farm until April 17th. And as far as I could research, I could not find out who had made these allegations. I'm not even sure who made the June 2005 allegations. Now, the DHS worker who showed up on April 17th noted that when they arrived, the, quote, adopted father's clothes were wet, and he explained that he had fallen in the pond when trying to retrieve an almost dead catfish. The worker documented that the adoptive father appeared to be on medication, as his speech was slightly slurred. The worker wanted to interview Colton, but they were told that he was not there. The Clarks told the worker that Colton was currently at his grandmother's fixing a goat pen, and at his aunt and uncle's insistence, Homer told the DHS worker the same thing. The worker then said that they would be back 3 days later on April 20th, and when they showed up on that day, they were going to interview Colton. Seminole County Sheriff Investigator Dave Hansen said, quote, the Clarks kept making excuses. They would schedule an appointment, but then call back and say he was sick. They made several excuses. Finally, the worker told them, look, we're coming out there today and we're going to see Colton. That's when Rebecca called 911. Now, I'm not sure if Hansen was just using hyperbole here, because in a report written by the Oklahoma Commission on Children and Youth, I'm just going to refer to them as the OCCY for this video, it stated that Rebecca called DHS on that day, April 20th, and reported her nephew missing. And in response, DHS, quote, made a finding of services recommended as to threat of harm by the adoptive parents and recommended again that the family seek counseling. Colton would last be seen on Thursday, April 20th, 2006, around 1 p.m. at his aunt and uncle's home in the living room. He was last seen wearing a sky blue t-shirt, Wrangler jeans, blue and white tennis shoes, and his silver framed glasses. Now, Rex and Rebecca told police and DHS workers that, they were getting ready to leave the house that Thursday, and when they were getting ready to leave, they noticed they couldn't find Colton anywhere. They said Colton had a scheduled therapy session in Norman, and then later had that scheduled appointment with the DHS worker that we talked about. They said Colton was not really looking forward to either of these events that he had to do that day, and that his backpack was also missing. Homer told authorities the exact same thing. However, there was another family member who contradicted the Clarks and Homer's assertion, and apparently the search for Colton really ramped up into high gear that Thursday, and by Friday, dogs were brought in to try and see if they could track Colton using his scent, but unfortunately, they would be unable to pick up any scent or trace of him. Police, of course, interviewed the Clarks and Homer, and they all said the same thing. They didn't know where he had gone. He had had his therapy session that day that was scheduled, followed by that visit with the DHS worker. He wasn't really looking forward to it, and they had no idea where he could have gone. On Saturday, April 22nd, Colton's disappearance was picked up by the local papers. Gene Thaxton of the State Amber Alert Committee announced that Colton had last been seen that Thursday, April 20th at 1 p.m., but that an Amber Alert for him had not been issued. And this was because Colton's case had not met the criteria. Thaxton told the papers, quote, "We have discussed it, but there's no information that the young male has been abducted. He's listed as a missing juvenile." Seminole County Sheriff Joe Craig said, quote, "He could have wandered out or gotten out on the road and someone picked him up. We've searched last night and we've got the search teams together again today. We're searching the fields and wooded area here, just trying to see if we can find any clues." Colton's disappearance was the third disappearance in less than a month and the second in less than a week in Oklahoma. Meanwhile, several search agencies continued scouring the local area, the wooded area surrounding the Clark's farm, looking for any trace or sign of him. Colton and Homer's biological parents were also contacted and interviewed. They were ruled out as suspects. I believe they were both in rehab facilities when Colton disappeared. When there was still no sign of Colton that following Tuesday, authorities issued an Oklahoma Missing Child Alert, an OMCA, which is not as widespread or as substantial as an Amber Alert, which, as we know, distributes nationwide, is usually put on like billboards and electronic boards on highways and freeways and stuff. An OMCA ensures that flyers with the photo and relevant information of the missing child is distributed, and it's distributed on a statewide level and within a 200-mile radius of the state. Also interesting at this time, the police also announced a vehicle of interest. It was a 2003 gold GMC extended cab long bid pickup truck that they were looking for. They said it had tinted windows, a black bumper, and Oklahoma license plates. Again, I've said this a couple times this month, right? Very interesting reading the newspaper articles, knowing the overview of the case. We know what Colton and Homer were subjected to, and yeah, it's just very interesting to see the initial reports on Colton's disappearance. By this time, when police announced this vehicle of interest that ultimately led to nowhere, police had already combed 2,500 acres of wooded area and land. Seminole County Undersheriff Hugh Doty said, quote, "We've had search dogs, aircraft, helicopters, four-wheelers, OHP, Oklahoma Highway Patrol, divers that check all the ponds and stuff, but that's really about all we have. He's still a missing child, and we're doing all we can to locate him." They mentioned it was possible that Colton was a runaway because of his missing backpack, but Doty said that tips were still coming in. Quote, "My phone hasn't shut down hardly at all. I've been out on 2 or 3 different calls last night, and they were possible sightings by Eufaula Lake, and a lady called me from Texas. We still follow up on them them and just verify if they hold no substance or not. However, only the very next day on Wednesday, Sheriff Craig was telling the press that he thought Colton may very well be a runaway. Quote, he's not the average 9-year-old boy. He's had a rough life. He's streetwise, and his backpack was missing, and so was some food. Sheriff Craig told the media about, Colton's rough upbringing and how he had been adopted. Quote, the boy also apparently wasn't happy at his current home, where he recently was grounded for 30 days. More details had come out about the day that Colton had last seen / disappeared, and Sheriff Craig said, quote, he wasn't wanting to go to the doctor that morning, and he wasn't wanting to go to DHS. He didn't like DHS, and he don't like cops. He also said that Child Services had a, quote, referral on Colton, but didn't really elaborate on what he meant by that. Like, I guess there's lots of different kinds of referrals, and so he didn't elaborate. Apparently, department referrals can be made by anyone, including children themselves, who suspect negligence, abuse, or wrongdoing. Quote, I think someone else had called in a complaint, is all Craig said. Now, there was a potential sighting of Colton the next day on Thursday, and the Seminole County Sheriff's Department had been tipped off that there was like a young boy who was like running towards like a wooded area. I guess the person who called in this potential sighting said that the boy had taken off into the woods when they called out to them, but it turned out to not be Colton at all. After another week, on Tuesday, May 2nd, Rex and Rebecca stated that they were offering a $10,000 reward for any information that led to Colton's whereabouts. Rebecca stated that she had established the fund at Bank First locations, and she told the papers, quote, we had someone mail us a check for $100, and we just thought there would be a better way for people to help. The audacity of these people. And I was unclear if it was also like around the same time when they establish and publicly announce this fund, this reward. But I know during Colton's disappearance, in the first few weeks, Rebecca also stated that Homer and Colton had been sexually abused and molested by family members. Jerry, remember Jerry Clark, Rex's mother, the boy's grandmother? She disputed that and was very upset that Rebecca had said that, and she told the press, quote, they weren't abused, they were just poor little neglected boys. There's nothing wrong with those boys. I know they were not abused when they were up here. We all helped with them. But Homer also made accusations, I think around the same time, and he said that he had been molested by his grandfather. I don't know if he meant Jerry's husband or his other grandfather, and his older sister Raven. But I guess according to Raven herself, both she and Colton's grandfather went to the police and like took lie detector tests and passed, and no charges were ever filed. I'm unclear if this was related to the earlier allegations that we talked about with the 7 family members. I was a little unclear if this was that same incident. And it was also during this week, this first week in May, that the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation became involved in Colton's case, and they assisted the Seminole County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Craig, meanwhile, finding no sign of Colton at all, finally asked Rex and Rebecca if they would consent to taking a polygraph test. The police at this point, like they had just followed lead after lead, guys, even leads that were put to them by psychics. That's how desperate they were. And they're just like, this lead after lead turned out to be nothing after nothing, right? Leads were drying up. And so at this point, right, like they were starting to just turn around and start, looking at everyone in the boys' lives. Sheriff Craig said, quote, there's a lot of people involved in this investigation that are going to be suspects until we can clear them, including the parents. I have asked them to take the polygraph and told them they were considered suspects, and they said they had nothing to hide. Now, the Clarks initially told Sheriff Craig, like, oh my God, yeah, totally, we'll totally do a polygraph for sure. Yeah, like, no problem. And so Sheriff Craig was planning to schedule the test to take place the following week. It was going to take place, I think, at the offices of the Bureau of Investigation somewhere. However, only a day or two later, the Clarks publicly announced to the press that they would not be submitting to a polygraph test after all. And this was based on advice that they had received. Rebecca told the papers, quote, my husband is on medication and so is my son. They were already interviewed by the FBI and OSBI, the Bureau. My husband went to the psychiatrist at the VA and has PTSD, and so do the boys from the trauma of abuse. And the psychiatrist, she said, had advised them not to do the polygraph. And then she said that a volunteer lawyer had given them the same advice. Quote, he said it would be a lose-lose situation. The only thing that would be gained from that is nothing, and it wouldn't be accurate with my husband and son being on medication and having PTSD. Now, not only did the Clarks declined to take this polygraph test. They also stopped communicating with the authorities at all at this point. They completely clammed up, stopped cooperating, stopped letting investigators search the property and stuff, and just completely shut off. Sheriff Craig later told the papers that this case had just befuddled him, and just every lead that they thought they had, every clue that they thought they stumbled across had just led to nothing. Quote, "My gut feeling at this point tells me this boy is dead. From what I learned, he was a young boy that could not be isolated. He loved animals. If he's not caged up somewhere, he's going to be out where someone could see him. He's left there with a little short-sleeve shirt and jeans, and some of the cold, rainy nights would have been hard on him." He said that their search for Colton had included, quote, "good search dogs and tracker dogs that worked with the Ohio State Highway Patrol, and they had even used helicopters and like heat sensors for 2 days to try to find any sign of Colton, but nothing could be found." Quote, "Something's not right here. We have runaways from here all the time. Somebody sees them, they get hungry and go get something to eat. They break into someplace. But there hasn't been one good sighting of Colt. If somebody would tell me something we haven't done, I'd like to know what it is. Every local sighting we've gotten to just like that. What else do I do?" And 2 months would pass without any sign of Colton. No sign of him, no clues. No one had any inkling as to his whereabouts or what could have happened to him. One of the agents with the State Bureau of Investigation, Tommy Graham, updated the press after this point on the status of the investigation after 2 months had passed, and he said, quote, "Basically, we don't know what happened to him. He could have just ran away, but you would have thought a small child like that would have shown up somewhere by now. It could be that he ran away. All the way up to the unthinkable. We just don't know, and there's not any hard evidence to point one way or the other." Which is definitely tough, right? Like, yeah, they have no evidence one way or the other to prove whether, Colton was like murdered, something happened to him, or if he ran away. And that's gotta be so frustrating, having like 0 leads. But even though both Graham and Sheriff Craig had posited that, he may have run away or whatever, they did still mention that, like, it's possible he still could have run away, but it's very odd not to have, like, any sign of him whatsoever. Like, that is what was odd. Sheriff Craig said, quote, "We're still plugging along at it, hoping we'll eventually get a break somewhere. But right now, we don't have a clue of anything. It's just a puzzle." The OCCY became involved in the case on May 10th. They had received a complaint that DHS had inadequately investigated allegations of abuse, and the OCCY then found out that Colton was missing as they were investigating that complaint. And then 5 days after this, on May 15th, DHS received a report that Homer was at threat of harm following his little brother's disappearance. During a subsequent investigation of this, DHS discovered that Rex and Rebecca had given Homer part of a Valium pill, even though he didn't have a prescription, and he was freaking 11. Later that same month, the OCCY started expressing their concerns for Homer's safety. However, the Seminole County District Attorney's Office apparently rejected a series of complaints filed by DHS, which requested to have Homer removed from Rex and Rebecca's custody. And these were complaints that were apparently made to the District Attorney's Office in May and June. Homer was finally taken into emergency custody on September 30th, after he ran away from the Clark's home. He said, quote, "I either sit there in that house and let them beat me to death, or I run away and give myself some slim chance of making it out of that hellhole." There was an old dog bite that he had that required medical attention, and there, of course, they did a physical examination and saw all of the scars and telltale signs of lifelong abuse. And thankfully, that is when Homer was immediately removed from Rex and Rebecca's custody. In October, I read an article that said Homer actually got himself into a little bit of trouble when he was accused of breaking into a neighbor's home and stealing their gun and cell phone. And it is after this incident that Rex and Rebecca officially relinquished their parental rights over Homer. And it is also at this time that Homer's other biological family were only told that Homer had been placed into an emergency foster home and was being well taken care of, but that he didn't want anything to do with any of them. He wanted nothing to do with his biological family. And it is after Homer is settled into to a permanent family and adopted. He changed his name to TJ Sloane, and that is his current legal name. I'm going to keep referring to him as Homer for the rest of the video just so it doesn't get confusing. And like I just said, he was placed with a couple of foster families, but Homer eventually did find a loving family to adopt him. It was a military family. He said, quote, "I was adopted. I flew straight to Spain. That was the first time I had ever been on an airplane." He said his adopted father, who was a U.S. naval soldier, treated him very well. And after a couple of years, the family moved back to the U.S., to Tennessee. Homer said he was socially awkward as a teen, but playing baseball helped his self-confidence. Quote, "I played baseball and we won state my senior year. I was lucky enough I got a full ride to go to college. So after high school was over, I went to college and played there for 2 years. And after that, I got out and started my life. All I needed was a chance." And see, it's situations like this that, yeah, make me want to like adopt or foster a child. Like you said, he just needed a chance to be in a loving home, you know? After more than a year had passed with still no sign of Colton, guys, the investigation had officially dried up on leads and the case was dead in the water. In a September 2007 interview, Sheriff Craig told the papers, quote, "It makes you feel hopeless. You've gone out there and searched all this area and you feel like you failed. We're talking about a 9-year-old boy. There hasn't been a night that I haven't gone to bed and seen this young man's face. I just keep thinking, why haven't we found this kid?" And this is also when investigators, including Sheriff Craig, publicly named Rex and Rebecca as potential suspects / persons of interest. And mainly stating that they feel like Rex and Rebecca knew more than they were letting on. He said, quote, "They gave us consent to search the house. We didn't find anything unusual. But what was odd to me is that they talked about Colt in the past tense, right out of the box. My first thought is that they're trying to hide something. Someone knows something and they aren't telling." Seminole County Sheriff Shannon Smith said, quote, "Homer said he had 2 pairs of shoes that he always wore, and both pairs were still at the house." She also said that when police first interviewed the Clarks and Homer at the farm, at the home, that Homer didn't look anyone in the eye and kept looking to Rex and Rebecca before he would say anything. Quote, "There was total control in that room. It was like he was looking at them, checking with them for permission to say anything." And it is after this article came out, you know, after Sheriff Craig and the rest of the Seminole County Sheriff's Department started, like, you know, publicly announce their suspicions that, yeah, the Clarks all of a sudden didn't want to talk to the press, couldn't get a hold of them. Big shock. Jerry, the boy's grandmother, remember Rex's mother, she talked to the press. And she voiced how, yeah, she was certain that her grandson was dead at this point. She said, quote, "A little boy just don't disappear in a small place like Seminole. I really do think Colton's life is over. The only thing that comforts me, if he is dead, is that he went to heaven because he was so young. He deserves a headstone, so people can go by and visit him every once in a while." And I gotta imagine that's gotta be the worst. Like, it's already bad enough to have a loved one, you know, go missing, murdered or something like that. But to, like, not know at all, not have the remains or anything, like, God, that's got to be, like, a whole other level of, like, frustrating. At this point, I guess Jerry was completely estranged from her son and daughter-in-law. I don't think she had spoken to them since Rebecca had made those public accusations of the boys being molested by members of the family. Sheriff Craig did say that he was not ready to close Colton's case, though, and stated that he did want to interview Homer again. At this point, as we know, Homer was, guessing probably in Spain or at the very least in a foster home. Sheriff Craig said, quote, "I've been waiting to interview him until he was in a good environment. He's a sharp young man. I think he knows something." He said that after Homer had gotten away from the Clarks and had been in his new home for a bit, quote, "He is a totally different boy." And it was during this same year, 2007, that the OCCY stated an open public letter that criticized the DHS, criticized them for policy violations, and for not assigning a high enough priority to the allegations that DHS had received in June of 2005. Remember, those allegations had only been classified a priority 2 investigation. And in this open letter, the OCCY was saying, like, yeah, this should have been, like, priority 1. You should have, like, dedicated way more time and resources to this. Raven, you know, remember Colton, Homer's half-sister, she also blamed DHS for everything and openly criticized them as well, saying, quote, "Do I think DHS did wrong? yes, I pretty much think they're at fault for this. And she, blamed that it was, due in part to their negligence that, Colton is now gone, presumed dead. And apparently this wasn't the first time that Oklahoma's DHS had been in hot water. They had been criticized for neglect and negligence for children in their care, and there had also been a federal lawsuit over it. Yeah, so them having, all this coming out now, it sort of just kind of added fuel to the fire that, their DHS over in Oklahoma was, pretty incompetent. I would bet probably underfunded as well. By June of 2010, the Bureau of Investigation was still working Colton's case, and they actually offered a $5,000 reward for any information that led to Colton's whereabouts. But apparently at this point, the hope of finding Colton, dead or alive, was pretty non-existent. Many assumed that Colton was in fact dead, but there had just been no evidence one way or the other that pointed to anything, you know what I mean? And I think at some point, Colton's case must have been officially closed, because an article stated that in September of 2015, the Seminole County Sheriff's Office had reopened Colton's case, along with the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation. They had also reopened the case. And there was a reporter named Mindy Wood who wrote an article about the case's reopening. She was a reporter for an online news agency located out of Shawnee. And the organization was called Red Dirt Report, and her article was titled "Missing Boy Not Forgotten, Colt Clark." The article spoke about investigators' suspicions. Quote, "His backpack was missing. He left his favorite red shoes. Scent dogs did not detect a scent for Levi Colt Clark leaving the property. So if he ran away, you'd think the dogs would have picked it up, but they didn't." She wrote about how authorities had suspected the Clarks not too long after Colton's disappearance. Quote, "They referred to Levi in the past tense immediately. Homer was the brother that lived there at the time, seemed very intimidated, wouldn't make eye contact, wouldn't speak to them." And the article wrote how the investigators' first move after reopening this case was to re-interview Homer, who, remember, as we know, was an adult, had changed his name to TJ Sloane, and was living in Tennessee. Homer later said that not long after being placed with his foster family, he did try to tell law enforcement what had happened to his brother, but that nothing had happened until 5 years later. Now, during those 5 years, Homer had continuously searched his brother's name online, and one day he saw Mindy's article about the case reopening. He read how, investigators' first step was to try to interview Homer, but it said it in the article as well, they didn't know he had changed his name to TJ Sloane and didn't know that he was in Tennessee. So, after he read this article, he then decided to contact them. He was hoping maybe he could get someone to listen to him finally, and he'd be able to tell his story. Quote, "This will bother me the rest of my life if I don't at least try just one more time. It will probably add up to nothing." So Homer ended up calling up investigator Hansen, and the two had about a 30 to 40 minute conversation. Hansen and Bureau Investigation Agent Gary Perkinson then flew to Tennessee to hear Homer's story. He told them that back when his brother first disappeared, quote, "I was just scared. I was pretty much brainwashed. I didn't give investigators much information." He told them that he was made by his aunt and uncle to repeat the rehearsed story to authorities who were investigating Colton's disappearance. They made him repeat over and over that Colton had a therapy session, he wasn't looking forward to it, and he must have run away. Seminole County District Attorney Paul B. Smith would later say, quote, "At this time, Homer's an awkward kid, beaten down, and he gets up enough courage to say, 'We need to call the police. Colton is gone.' And Rex kicks him in the ribs and says, 'We are not calling the police, and you are not going to tell anyone, and we will say he ran off. And if you tell any different, we will kill you." Investigator Hansen wrote in the affidavit, quote, "Homer said Rex and Rebecca practiced this story with him almost on a daily basis. Rex and Rebecca constantly rehearsed with Homer to make sure he told the story the way they practiced. Rex repeatedly told Homer if he did not tell the story, Rex would beat Homer to death. Homer told the story they rehearsed." Homer recounted for Hansen and Perkinson how his aunt and uncle had both started physically and verbally abusing him and his brother almost immediately after the adoption became official. He also noted how the physical beatings really hit an uptick after they were taken out of public school. And he also told them that the last time he saw his brother was on March 23rd, 2006, and on that day, He said Rex and Rebecca had beaten Colton for 45 minutes in the master bedroom, and this is after they had accused Colton of stealing some tacky turquoise ring. Homer said that he could hear his little brothers screaming and crying, and the affidavit continued, quote, Homer woke up at 2:35 a.m. to go to the bathroom. Homer saw the television was on. It was SpongeBob. The light from the television shined on the couch. Homer saw Colton laying on the couch. There was an old green army sleeping bag laying over Colton. Homer saw Colton's face was black and blue. Homer did not know if Colton was breathing or not. The brother said he woke up again at 5:15 a.m. that morning. He said the television was off, Colton was not on the couch, the sleeping bag was gone, and his uncle was standing in the kitchen already dressed. Homer thought this was strange because Rex was not normally up and dressed this early in the morning. Homer said that he immediately knew something was wrong. Quote, we didn't have anything, but we always had each other. It was an inseparable bond, and that's how I knew right off the bat he wouldn't run away. We were way too close for him to get up and run away. The shit that this poor kid, guy now because he's grown up, but what he had to go through is just so not fair. And we're not done yet. So the affidavit continued, quote, Homer knew Colton did not run away because Homer and Colton were close. Homer also knew Colton left his boots and jacket. Homer knew Colton would never leave the house without telling him or without wearing his coat and boots. Hansen and other investigators also interviewed another witness. This was someone who was a tenant of the Clarks. He rented a trailer on Rex and Rebecca's property. And this tenant told investigators that in the summer of 2010, he was going fishing, all right? And so he was going to go digging for worms, all right? He didn't use any of that cheater bait. I was totally thinking of King of the Hill when I read this. So yeah, this tenant was out, summer of 2010, he's going to go fishing, so he's going to go dig for some worms, all right? Now, this tenant said he was about to go dig for some worms right by this old decaying bale of hay that had been on the property for a while. And so he was heading over there. But before he could get there, Rex had come out of nowhere running and yelling for him to stop. Quote, Rex came out and met him. Rex yelled to get away and told him to never dig in that area. Rex said a cow had died and they had buried it there, and he did not want it dug up and cause problems for the other cows. Now, at this point in the investigation, investigators were not even quite clear what day Colton had actually disappeared. They weren't even 100% certain that April 20th, 2006 was the last day that Colton had disappeared. They thought at this point that he may have been killed as early as March 2006, per Homer's testimony. However, there was a DHS report that noted that they had spoken with another family member, quote, who verified Colt was at their family home on April 17th, 2006, as previously reported. And finally, on Friday, April 8th, 2016, just over 6 months since investigators had reopened Colton's case, they announced that both Rex, who was 65 years old, and Rebecca, who was 59, were both arrested. A search of the Clark's property was also underway at that same time, and the warrants for Rex and Rebecca's arrest charged them with first-degree murder, child abuse, child neglect, and conspiracy to commit a felony. They both pleaded not guilty, and during their interrogation, Rex supposedly laughed at the authorities, and according to District Attorney Smith, who would end up prosecuting the case, quote, he said, "You're never going to find him." He laughs, "You're never going to find Colton Clark." Spokesman for the Bureau Investigation, Jessica Brown, updated the press on the search that was ongoing on the Clark's farm. She spoke about the massive search that was underway, the special equipment that had been brought in, and she, also announced that, they did believe that Colton was dead and that his remains were somewhere on the property. Quote, "We have ground-penetrating radar there in case we can narrow down an area to search for any possible remains." Forensic archaeologist Kent Bueller was brought in. He was among those who searched the property, primarily looking for any sign of remains. Quote, "In this case, we're looking possibly for a buried body. In this case, we're looking at roughly 10 years, so that's a major factor. And we look for a lot of surface indicators that may still be present that might indicate a clandestine grave." He also described the ground-penetrating radar and T-bone equipment that they were using and kind of explained that a little bit. Quote, "You loosen the dirt if you dig through more than one layer. You mix up those layers, and so when you fill that hole back in, it's different than what the undisturbed soil was around it, and that probe will pick up that looser compaction." At this time, it was also announced the abuse that Homer and Colton had suffered at the hands of Rex and Rebecca, and they also released details on how, after all these years, Homer had gotten the strength to, come forward with what he had experienced. The press were also notified via affidavits that that police did suspect that Colton was buried somewhere on the farm near a hay bale, and I'm guessing that's probably based on what that tenant told them. Authorities would end up searching the Clark farm for 3 days, and they never found any sign of Colton or his remains. Quote, "I hate to say this, but it's just still ongoing. We're just plugging away. We plan on being here for a while. We're by no means done. We're by no means discouraged. We're just going along. We're still working." This was according to investigator Hansen. Seminole County District Attorney Chris Ross added, quote, "There's a lot of ground to search." And I guess one time when the Clarks had to go to the sheriff's office, there was some money that was recovered on the property, and they had to bring the Clarks in to sign some paperwork that released the money into the custody of their lawyer. And while they're there, Rex leaned over to investigator Hansen and said, quote, "You didn't find anything on my property." And Hansen's like, "Yeah, that's correct." And Rex then told him, quote, "You're never going to find him. I plan on walking out of here." Rex and Rebecca were each officially charged on April 19th, 2016, and they were charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, 4 counts of child abuse by injury, 2 counts of child neglect, conspiracy to commit witness intimidation, and witness intimidation. District Attorney Ross said, quote, "We believe that there is sufficient evidence to prove the child is deceased. A lot of people think that prosecuting murder cases without bodies is a new thing. It's actually been going on since the 1700s successfully. It started in England, then it came over to the United States. The first federal case is sometime in the 1800s. The first Oklahoma case was actually in 1909 when a wife murdered her husband and burned his body beyond recognition." Ross continued, quote, "We have the case law that firmly establishes that you don't have to have a body." Ross himself had actually personally successfully prosecuted no body cases, with his most recent one being in 2007. That was when a woman was given life without parole for the murder of her 6-year-old son, whose body had never been found. And this was back in 2002, when her 6-year-old initially disappeared. And of course, at trial, the prosecution had their star witness, Homer. Defense attorney Robert Butler was assigned the Clark's case, and he said both of his clients maintained their innocence. Quote, "Both of them do, and they've both been kept separate, even in court. They're both steadfast with the same types of information. It didn't sound canned to me. You can tell canned answers. It's not of that nature. They're both maintaining the same story. He disappeared." Yeah, pretty easy to have the same information when you rehearse the story over and over again, right? Butler went on about how good of people that Rex and Rebecca were because they decided to take responsibility for the boys all the way back in 2003. Quote, "They have maintained their innocence from day one. I think they've been pulling their hair out for years trying to find that young man. They adopted these children and then inherited a horrible situation." On April 23rd, a candlelight vigil was held for Colton, and it was organized by Minister Jim Benedict, who said that he just wanted to make sure that in the chaos of all this, in the trial and everything, that Colton wasn't forgotten. The Clark's trial started with jury selection on October 2nd, 2017, and it was moved to Ada in Pontotoc County, and this was due to the massive publicity that this case garnered. It was a pretty big local case, and the Clark's case was overseen by District Judge George Buettner. District Attorney Smith tried the case for the state, and as we just mentioned, Butler was the defense. And I'm pretty sure the Clarks were tried in one trial. At trial, the defense maintained that Colton had run away, and the prosecution was, of course, maintaining that Rex and Rebecca murdered him. Homer, as we stated before, obviously was their star witness, and he told in gruesome detail the abuse that him and his little brother had suffered. Quote, "My butt is still scarred from the abuse." He talked about one incident, right, where they were at a cousin's house and they were jumping on a trampoline, and at one point, as Homer was bouncing, his shorts rode up or got pulled down or something to where part of his buttocks was exposed, and his cousins could see the plain, visible, gruesome scarring. And when they asked Homer about it, he said that, yeah, Rex had done that to him. He said after he and Colton had gone home that evening that Rex received a phone call from a family member who let him know about what Homer had said. He said the Clarks became enraged, and he, quote, "knew it was going to be bad. To this day, I don't think someone could take a beating like that." And he said it was after this incident that the boys were really not allowed to leave the house at all. It was like very, very rare, and he kept an even tighter leash on their comings and goings. He testified about Rex calling them sexual deviants and having to write like those bizarre sexual fantasies in a journal. And I guess during his testimony, when he was talking about this, I guess he turned right to Rex and looked him dead in the eye and said, quote, "I will look you in the face and tell you I'm not like that." And I guess Rex just sort of like smirked and laughed in response, and this really angered Homer. And Butler, just objected, quote, "I object to personal attacks." And yeah, it was a whole thing. Homer recounted the last night that he saw his little brother, which he believed was around March 20th, 2006. He said the day was pretty normal with chores and whatnot, and it was while they were eating dinner that Rex and Rebecca then accused Colton of stealing some tacky turquoise ring, which Colton denied, and that's when he was taken to the master bedroom. He then described the abuse that he could hear his little brother being subjected to. Quote, "I could hear them screaming at him and beating on him. Colt is standing there. He is black and blue. They are beating on him." He said he was doing the dishes and all he could hear was like the screaming and the hitting. He said when he was done, he went back to the bedroom to ask if he had any more chores to do that evening. He did not. He said that when he was in this room, he saw his little brother. His face was already discolored. Quote, "That was the last time I ever saw him with his eyes open." He talked about how, he woke up and saw his brother on the couch around 2 a.m. Quote, "I could see that his face was beat up." He said when he awoke the next morning and Colton was gone, he then searched the farm looking for his brother. He said, maybe he just got a head start on like the morning chores. And when he couldn't find his brother, that's when he went back in the house and, told Rex like, "Hey, I think he's missing. I think we should call the police." And Rex said no, that they weren't going to do that. And that's when, he became upset, because he's 11 years old and his little brother is missing. And that's when Rex hit him, specifically kicked him in the stomach. And Homer said things just went on like nothing ever happened. He talked about how terrified and scared he was to tell anyone what he knew. He then recounted how he had run away not long after his brother disappeared, and that when he was picked up by law enforcement, he did try to tell them what he knew and suspected, that he thought Rex and Rebecca had killed Colton. But without evidence, nothing ever happened. He was obviously, of course, very emotional when he testified, and said that he wanted to, quote, "relieve myself of the feeling that I let Colt down." On cross-examination, Butler told Homer, quote, "That was quite an incredible story you told." He accused Homer of lying, telling contradictory things to different people. Butler questioned Homer about a Facebook message that he had apparently sent Rebecca when he was 18. Apparently in the message, Homer said that he had a great life now and urged Rebecca to turn herself in, and she never replied. Butler asked if Homer had ever, asked the Clarks about their will or anything. No, he hadn't. Butler then asked why Homer had said to a TV news reporter, supposedly on camera, why he was going to sue DHS. And Homer was like, "I don't know what you're talking about. That interview never happened and I never said this thing," which I just thought that was so weird when I read that. I was like, what is the defense? I don't understand why he even brought those things up. I don't get it. Investigator Hansen, who was a rookie officer when Colton first disappeared, also testified. He testified to the Clarks' demeanor when Colton first went missing. He said they seemed unconcerned, and that Rex told officers that he really wasn't concerned about Colton because he had taught his nephew survival tactics, so he wasn't too concerned. Now, Hansen said that this immediately struck him and the other officers as just very odd, what a weird thing to say. Quote, "Nothing made sense to me. It didn't pass the smell test." He spoke about how the Clarks referred to Colton in the past tense, immediately, and Rex continuously referred to Colton as a, quote, "pervert" and a, quote, "sodomite." Hansen said, quote, "It was just appalling." Yeah, this is actively as they reported Colton missing, guys, and in the first initial hours that he's reported missing. And this is Rex's behavior. Another witness offered testimony that perhaps could explain what happened to Colton's body. So Randy Lehman was a contractor, and he built a storm shelter on the Clark farm in 2013. And he testified, quote, "There was damage to the turbine when they put it in. Rex was going on about his days in Vietnam, and if anybody came on his property, he'd shoot him and that sort of thing." And as Randy was leaving, he told Rex, quote, "Now, we're going to have to send our employee out here to fix this turbine. When he comes out, don't shoot him." Rex responded, "Well, if I do, I'll know what to do with the body. I'll cut it up, put it in a barrel, cook it up, kick it over, feed it to my 5 dogs, and gather up the bones and the rest of it and throw it in the river." Yeah. And apparently, this little bit about Randy's testimony right here, was apparently very compelling to the jury. This really stuck out to them. On cross-examination, Butler told Randy that, hey, what you just testified to, That sounds like, quote, that movie. But he didn't specify what movie. And then he asked Randy if he had seen that movie. But Randy had, like, no clue what movie Butler was talking about. And apparently Butler didn't either, because instead of telling Randy what movie he was referencing, and he just said, like, oh, you know, the movies where, like, the bodies are buried in barrels, and then they're knocked over, and, like, Rottweilers, like, eat the body. You know that movie. And, like, Randy had no clue what he's talking about. Do you guys know this movie that Butler's referencing? Yeah, I just thought, like, what a weird tactic to take when you don't even know, like, what movie you're referencing. I don't know. It's very weird. The defense really tried to highlight and hamper on the discrepancy when Homer said Colton was last seen, you know, end of March, versus what everyone else believed, you know, April 20th or so. And the defense called in witnesses to sort of, you know, bolster that, this fact right here that there's discrepancies about, like, when exactly Colton disappeared. All of the defense witnesses said that they had seen Colton in the days leading up to April 20th, 2006. The defense called Jared Wilson, who was 16 when Colton disappeared. He lived down the road from the Clarks. He had also helped search for Colton all over, including, like, crawling into beaver dams. Jared testified that every day when he got out of school, he would meet Colton when he got off the bus, and the two of them would go, you know, then hop on the tractor and go feed cattle together. Jared testified that the last time he saw Colton was on April 19th, 2006, and that he was, quote, positive that was the last day he had seen him. Jared's father, Philip Wilson, also testified. He was saying that he had seen Colton in the days / like the week of April 20th, 2006. He had also helped search for Colton. You know, he took Homer out on his four-wheeler, and they went and, like, searched like every, like, nook and cranny and crevice where Colton liked to hide. Butler also brought forth the Clark's family friend, Travis Jackson Jr. And I guess he, like, was a family friend who visited the farm about 2 to 3 times a week. He testified that he last saw Colton about 2 weeks before April 20th. He said that he thought that the boys had a good life with the Clarks, and he never saw signs of abuse himself. Butler called yet another witness, Ada resident Donna Denslow, and she had a booth every year at the medieval fair that happened in Norman. She said the Clarks had a booth right next to hers every year, and she said she last saw Colton at the Renaissance Fair of 2006, which was held the first week of April. She said only one of the boys went to the fair that year, and she said that they looked so much alike that she actually had to ask the one boy that she saw there, oh, which one are you? And the boy told her, quote, I'm Colton. She testified that Colton told her that his brother couldn't be at the fair because he had gotten in trouble at school. And I don't know, man, I'm not sure why Butler thought this was such a big deal to bring up at trial. Like, the discrepancy we're talking about here is very minuscule. First of all, Homer was 11 years old when his brother disappeared. He had been traumatized and abused, brainwashed into telling, like, one story. Like, I don't understand why he was so harping on this fact. Like, there's, like, only, like, a month discrepancy. Like, Homer thought it was towards the end of March, but, like, I know when I was that age, like 10, 11 years old, I didn't really pay attention to the date. I paid more attention to, like, the days of the week than I did, like, the specific date. So, I don't know. Personally, if I was sitting on that jury, this wouldn't be a very compelling angle or argument for me, because I'd be like, who gives a fuck? Like, he was an 11-year-old traumatized boy. Who cares if he can't remember if it was March 23rd or April 20th? You know what I mean? On October 9th, 2017, after about 2.5 hours of deliberations, Rex and Rebecca were found guilty on all charges. The jury got the case just after 5 p.m., and they returned their verdict at 7:42 p.m. The jury recommended life in prison without the possibility of parole, and in December, the judge took the recommendation. As they were being led out of the courtroom, Rebecca only told reporters, quote, we're innocent. And Rex told them, quote, I don't figure to spend our lives in prison. We're innocent. Once we get honestly tried, we'll be free. District Attorney Smith just said, quote, it's been a long battle. It is definitely a relief. A relief for the community, a relief for law enforcement who carried the guilt and the scars of the case, and the regret for not being able to solve it back in 2006. Homer told the press, quote, it was so nice knowing that they would never see freedom again, and that I could see it on his face, and I could see it on hers. He also told the press what Rex had told him as he was being let out of court. Yeah, Rex said he would live to piss on my grave. We will see how that ends. He's just a big, old, angry, cowardly man. That's all he ever has been. Nobody is scared of him. Nobody should be scared of him. Whatever he deserves, he'll get it. And as they were being led out of the courtroom, you know, a local news reporter, Zach Riel, he worked with the local ABC affiliate, KOCO News 5, and he was, like, one of the reporters, like, right there with Rex, you know, putting like the microphone in his face, and he straight up asked Rex, like, where's Colton's body? And Rex, all right, out of nowhere, he's still shackled, mind you, but out of nowhere, he pushes Zach up against a wall, gets like right in his face, and tells him, quote, boy, come here and give me a kiss. Other people said that he said, sweetheart, come here and give me a kiss. But either way, super creepy. Homer said of this incident, quote, what a lunatic the guy was. What an evil monster he was. To push someone up against a wall and make a creepy comment, why don't you give me a kiss? I mean, the guy's head is so far gone. As much as they tried to instill fear in me and ruin my life, they didn't achieve it. And again, the fact that like he got up in this dude's face and was like talking about him like kissing him and stuff, couple that with the fact he kept calling Colton and Homer like perverts and sexual deviants and all that, again, makes you wonder if maybe Rex doesn't have maybe some homosexual thoughts or tendencies or something or feelings that he isn't quite a big fan of. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time, right? Because it's just so weird to me. Like, what a weird thing to like accuse like kids of and stuff. It's just weird. Another candlelight vigil was held for Colton on October 11th, with Homer actually speaking at the event. Quote, it's been an incredible journey. Never in my wildest dreams had I thought I would be standing here today in celebration. I just wanted my brother to know that I deeply loved him and I did everything that I could. And I want everyone here to cherish your family and cherish your friends, because you just never know when the last time you'll see them. This tonight was not to be sad or to feel sorry for me or to feel sorry for Colton. This is a celebration. He only lived for 9 years, but he lived in those 9 years to his full potential. Investigator Hansen also spoke at the vigil. Quote, we started on this 11 years ago. It was a horrible situation. For everybody here, we appreciate you, and a lot of people that are here today were out looking for him. For Colton, 11 years ago, and it's a heartbreak we didn't find him. It's a heartbreak that we still haven't. Camp Bueller also attended. Remember, he was the archaeologist who searched the farm, and he said, quote, unfortunately, we did not find little Colton. But that happens sometimes with cases like this. It's disappointing to me to not find the remains in a situation like this, but the events of this week make all the effort from everybody worth it. District Attorney Smith also attended the vigil, and he said the vigil wasn't just for Colton's family and friend and those who knew Colton, but it was for the community at large. Quote, our community felt the pain and anguish of the loss of little Colton and grieved for those involved and supported the efforts of law enforcement to resolve this matter. And Homer said, quote, that's the closest thing he ever had to a proper funeral. He never got to see anything or go anywhere. He missed out on his whole life. He was 9 years old. I love him and miss him more than anything. I love him. I'm sorry this ever happened. We were failed by so many people. After the trial, Homer actually moved back to Seminole from Tennessee, and he actually became a firefighter. Quote, I had so much bitterness and hate for Seminole just because of what happened there. What better way to get rid of that than to try and give back and help the people who helped me and supported me? He also worked in landscaping design at some point and also managed to marry his longtime girlfriend, and the couple had a daughter. However, they have since moved from the Seminole area, and Homer admits that, though he has been able to, move on and build his life, it hasn't been easy. The trauma and the effects of the abuse that he suffered have, lifelong lingering effects. Quote, there was times where I was to the point of suicide. To this day, I still feel a hole. The biggest hole being the fact that his brother's remains have never been found. Quote, it's haunting knowing his remains are just out there. I still miss him like crazy. That is something that will never go away. Out of all of it, yeah. The thing that bothers me the most is just not having that other piece that completes me. He was definitely my other piece. He was my strength when I had none, and I just kind of had to redirect myself. I had to figure out what was going to be my new purpose. And Homer decided, at least in part, his new purpose was going to be helping abused children. Quote, you can't expect a little beat kid to come forth and tell the 300-pound man that's beating him. That's not how little kids' minds work. Monsters come out in the dark, and they don't always just appear right off the bat. You're not just going to see the first signs right away. But child abuse is a serious epidemic, and it takes other people to step up and, stop that. And Homer does have a message for those suffering from abuse. Quote, you are responsible for your future. You can do great things regardless of where you came from. If you see something, say something. Report it and follow through with it. He says he is left with physical scars and memories of his brother, and it's really that last school photo of Colton's taken in 2005 that really sticks with him and really pushes him to advocate for abused children. Quote, any kid who's ever suffered anything like this, I want them to know that people do love and care about them. I know that they seem forgotten, but they're not. Rex and Rebecca both appealed their convictions. On Thursday, October 24th, 2019, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals rejected Rebecca's appeal, and her defense was trying to argue that there was like improper evidence and statements given and that her counsel at trial was ineffective. That's literally all the information I could find on what her attorneys were claiming on why she deserved an appeal. But yeah, the criminal appeals court wasn't having any of it. And a week later, on Halloween of 2019, Rex's appeal was also denied by the criminal court of appeals. I could find like no information on that. I'm gonna guess his lawyers tried to argue the same thing as Rebecca's. Homer said that he hoped neither of them would appeal anymore. Quote, "He's where he needs to be, and so is she. I'll pray that they realize they've been defeated." Now, their appeals can still be appealed to a federal court, specifically a federal appeals court. And this was according to a spokesman for the state attorney general, Mike Hunter, whose office actually defended the convictions in the appeals court. And finally, in one last note, in an article from KOCO that was dated November of 2022, investigators and the Seminole County Sheriff's Office announced that they were going to search the Clark farm again for signs of Colton's remains, but they didn't give any sort of timeline of when they expected to do that. And that was the most up-to-date thing I could find. So if they did search the property again, it wasn't reported on. I can't imagine they found it because I feel like I would have found that information. But yeah, that's the tragic case of Colton Clark, guys. And oh my God, I hate Rex and Rebecca. They're dirty pigs. They're disgusting human trash. And like, look, I know this isn't politically correct, but like, come on, like, look at Rex here. Like, if you were to like think or even like put into like AI a child abusing, murdering piece of shit who's off his rocker, I feel like Rex is like the image it would spit out. Like, I know that's not politically correct. I know we're supposed to like have sympathy for people who have problems, but again, it's a fine line of when you yourself are a victim, and when you cross that line into being a perpetrator, you're no longer a victim, you know? Like, we can take your past into account for sure, but there were plenty of Vietnam veterans who have PTSD, STDs, and all kinds of like other ailments, and they don't go and murder and beat children. You know what I mean? I don't know, man. Like, you are a sick, special SOB to harm a child. Like, for real. I don't know. Thank you so much for Holly Lipton for recommending me this case. I tried so hard to find out more information about Colton, but I mean, that's what's sad when it's children cases, you know, is because they're so young, they had a short life, so there's not a whole lot to find out about them, you know? Yeah, the most I could find was that, yeah, he was a big Western fan, he loved cowboys and horses, and yeah, it's, that poor child, like, come on, dude, how do you look at that face? How do you look at that face and not just want to give it, like, all the hugs? I don't know. That's why, again, like, if I ever get the urge to have a child, I definitely want to adopt or foster, for sure. Yeah, there's so many kids. And then, like, look at, like, Homer, or TJ, that's his legal name now. I just wanted to keep using the Homer name just to make it consistent for the video. But TJ, I mean, look at his case, like, you know, because there's a lot of people, right, that'll, you know, if they want to adopt or foster, it's like only like babies or something, because they don't want like damaged kids. And it's like, you know, like he said, he's like, he just needed someone to give him a chance. And look at, like, he went on to, you know, have a wife and a child, and I hope they're still together, and I hope they're happy. I don't know if they've had more children, but I really hope that he is living his best life, and like, good for him on, you know, stepping up for other children who are abused, you know. Yeah, man, I don't know, just, yeah, good luck to TJ. I hope he is living his best life and can try to heal and give his children the childhood that him or Colton weren't able to have, you know? What do you guys think? Do you think they'll ever find Colton's remains? I don't know, man. I know, especially on like a farm, especially with the right equipment and stuff, you know what I'm saying? Like, I know there's a lot of gnarly ways to like dispose of remains where you'll never find a trace. I don't know, like, it's so sad. This probably sounds like hippy dippy or like silly, but like, at the very least, I hope his remains were at least able to be scattered, you know, on the earth or whatever. You know, he loved the outdoors, he loved animals, so, you know, if this has to happen, I hope maybe he was at least able to give back to the earth. I don't know. I know that sounds like lame and hippy-dippy. That's so heart-wrenching. That poor little boy. I don't know, man. Tell me your guys' thoughts. Like, doesn't this just break your heart? Doesn't it just absolutely break your heart? I really, really hope that Rex and Rebecca live every day in pain. I hope they have explosive bloody diarrhea every single day of their life. I hope they bite their tongue every single day. Like, just little shit like that. Like, they deserve no pity. They're monsters. They're just thugs, I mean, what else can you call an adult who abuses our most innocent society members, children, I don't know. I could go on, and I could definitely dive into some schadenfreude in what I hope happens to Rex and Rebecca every day. But yeah, we'll just have to settle for, knowing that they are locked up. They are being told what to do and when to do it and how to do it every single second of every single day. And yeah, fuck Rex and fuck Rebecca. Alrighty, guys, it's kind of a shorter one. Sorry, it's a little bit on the shorter side. Like I said, we've got a lot of nitty gritty cases to get into in the next few months. We will finish up next week with our last case, and man, this case I'm actively still researching it because I just keep digging, and it's just another layer and another layer, and yeah, it's definitely one to get into and makes you think. Well, until next Tuesday, I hope you take care out there. Hope I didn't bum you out too hard for the week. Go watch something light and funny. Go watch Star Trek Lower Decks. I've been in a Star Trek mood. I love Lower Decks. You don't even need to be a Star Trek nerd to love it. Go watch something to, put you in a lighter, better mood. Take care, stay safe, don't be a dick, and leave a little sparkle wherever you go. Alrighty, guys, I will see you next Tuesday. Thank you so much for hanging out. Bye-bye.